4.6, performing operations with complex numbers, okay? If you have a radical, okay, a square root of something, a fourth root of something, a sixth root of something, if I have a radical, can I have a negative inside of it?
No.
No. But we're going to learn about imaginary units, which allows you to have a negative inside a radical. When I have a negative in a radical, I have something called an imaginary unit. Imaginary unit is represented by the letter I. I equals radical negative 1. I equals radical negative 1. I squared always equals negative 1. So anytime you see an I squared, you can replace it with a negative 1 so that you can solve things. Okay, so I squared equals negative 1. The square root of a negative number has two rules that go with it. If I have the square root of a negative number, what I do is I take an I out of there. So I have I radical that negative number. So if I have radical negative 3, what I really have is I radical 3. If I had radical negative 4, how would I write that?
I radical 2, or I radical 2.
Kind of, okay. So if I have radical 4, I just put lotion on. Okay. If I have radical negative 4, you're right, I want to take the I out of there, which would give me I radical 4. What's the square root of 4?
2.
So you would actually end up getting 2I as your solution. Okay? So you can take the square root of a non-negative number, yes? Okay? So if I take that I out, now I can take the square root of it if it's a perfect square. Does that make sense? If it's not a perfect square, I leave it inside the radical. So like radical negative 3, I leave as I radical 3. Okay? The second rule is like this. If I have parentheses, I times a radical number, and I square it, what happens is it just gives me a negative of whatever's inside of that radical. Because I would get I squared. What does I squared equal?
You said I squared?
Yes.
-1.
Negative 1. So what happens is I get I squared, and this radical and that cancel, so I get negative 1 times 3, which gives me negative 3. Okay? How can I solve this equation here?
The blue one?
The blue one.
Subtract 11.
Subtract 11 first. So if I subtract 11, I get 2x squared minus or equals negative 48. Yes?
Yes.
Now what do I do?
Divide by 2.
Divide by 2 and you get x squared equals negative 24. Now what do I do? Square root it. So I get x equals what? What do I have to do with this radical negative 24 first? Take out an I. So I have plus or minus I radical 24. Now, 24, I need to make a factor tree and see if I can take anything out. I have 2 and 12. I have 2 and 6, right?
Yes.
So I can take out a 2. So you get x equals plus or minus 2I radical 6. We'll practice more of those in a minute. Cool.
Interesting.
We're splitting this lesson into 2 days. Maybe 3, because there's a lot to do. Let's try this one. What about solve x squared equals negative 38? What do I do?
Take square root.
Square root it. So x equals plus or minus what?
I. And then you have to
Breaks down 38. 2 goes into 38, what, 16 times? No, 19 times?
19 and 2.
So that doesn't break down, right?
No.
So then you just have that as your solution. What about,
So there will be something like that where it doesn't really break down.
Correct. What about 3x squared minus 7 equals negative 31? What do I need to do first?
Add 7.
Add 7. So then I get 3x squared. And what's negative 31 plus 7?
Negative 24.
Yep, negative 24. And then what do I need to do?
Divide by 3.
Divide by 3. So x squared equals negative 8. Now what do I do?
Take the square root.
And I get x equals plus or minus what?
Can't you do
I.
again?
But then I have to figure out 8 is what?
2 and 4. So then it would be 2i.
Yes, radical 2. Because you still have another one. So then you get x equals plus or minus 2i radical 2. Okay. That's when we're solving. Okay. When it says write the complex number in standard form, this is very, very simple. Okay. When I have something like this, let's say you have parentheses x plus 2 minus parentheses 3x minus 3. How do you do that?
You plug in what x equals?
He says
I'm not solving. How do I simplify that?
Combine
Combine like terms. So what's x minus 3x?
2x. Negative.
Negative 2x. What's 2 minus negative 3?
5. Positive.
Yes, positive 5. And that's as far as I can go, correct? Okay. When we are writing something, the complex number in standard form, we're doing the same thing. We're combining like terms like we did over here. Just we're going to combine i's with i's and whole numbers with whole numbers. Okay. So what's 8 plus 5?
13.
13. And what's negative I plus 2i? Okay. When it says standard form, when you write something in standard form, it has to be the constant first and then the imaginary number. Constant, then imaginary. If you write it in a different order, if you write the imaginary number first, then the constant, it's not correct. And there's a reason for that because we're going to graph it later and it needs to be in that order. So when it says write this in standard form, that is standard form. Okay? That is standard form. Now, let's talk about this one. How do I do 7 minus 3?
That's 4.
And then I have negative 6 minus negative 2.
Negative 4i.
Negative 4i. And that's also in standard form. You just leave it like that. Okay? Now, down here, look at this one. What do we need to do? What do you have?
You need to put the negative,
negative.
in front of both of those.
Yes, so 10 minus 6 is
4.
4.
Oh, that's 10. Oh,
And then negative 7i plus 4i is
Negative 3i.
negative 3i. Okay. And then the last example we'll do today deals with multiplying these. Okay? So let's say,
What about the 4 in that one?
what do you mean and what about the 4?
She did.
Negative 7i plus 4i gives you negative 3i. Okay, let's say I have this, and it says, what are the directions? Multiply the complex numbers. Okay,
Is it negative because of the 10? 10.
The
it's
negative.
negative because the negative sign has to be distributed. Okay, how would I multiply this? What do you think we would do?
Distribute.
Distribute. What is 4i times negative 6?
Negative 24i.
Negative 24i. What is 4i times I?
4i squared.
4i squared. Now, what do I know about I squared?
It equals negative 1.
It equals -1. So technically you have negative 24i plus 4 times -1. What is 4 times -1?
Negative 4.
-4. Now, is this in standard form? No. So what do I need to do with these two numbers? Flip them so that I have -4 minus 24i. So that's one where you just distribute.
So if it's
Anytime you get an I squared, you're going to replace it with a -1, period.
so if you get a problem that is like that, you can reverse it and then just do it.
Yes, you have to reverse it.
Okay.
Okay. And then the last one, let's look at one more multiplication. Let's say you have 9 minus 2i, and let's say you have 3 plus 5i. How would you do this? If those were x's, what would you do?
You would FOIL it.
You would FOIL it. So we're going to FOIL it. What's 9 times 3?
27.
What's 9 times 5? 9 times 5i.
45.
45i. What is -2i times 3?
Negative 6.
-6i. Don't forget the i. What's -2i times 5i?
Negative 10i.
-10i squared. Okay. Now we're going to combine some like terms. What's, we're just going to drop 27 down. What's 45i minus 6i?
39i.
39i. And then I have -10 times -1, right? Which gives me a positive 10. So I have this. So I have 10 plus 27 now. So I have 37 plus 39i. And that is in standard form. Okay? Those are the like 3 or 4 things you're working on today, depending on how you look at it. Yes.
So, to check it, we would have to look at those A, B, and C to figure out if it matches with one of the, like, standard form. So, like,
to check if it's in standard form. Correct.